Hello, and welcome to our latest installment of the Allegheny Conference on Community Development's Response and Recovery webinar series. I'm Brian Jensen, Senior Director at the Pennsylvania Economy League of Greater Pittsburgh. I'd like to thank our sponsors for their generous support for making these webinars possible: Peoples, Giant Eagle, Highmark Health, and UPMC Health Plan. I'd also like to thank members of the Allegheny Conference's Regional Investors Council who provide time and talent and resources to support our efforts. Today's webinar explores the impact of the COVID-19 economic shutdown on municipal tax revenue. The Center of Metropolitan Studies at the University of Pittsburgh recently completed a study that estimated a loss of nearly $1 billion in tax revenue for southwestern Pennsylvania municipalities. Our panelists today to help us explore this issue are the Honorable Kim Bracey, Executive Director of the Governor's Center for Local Government Services at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. The Honorable Marita Garrett, Mayor of the Borough of Wilkinsburg, and Dr. David Miller, Professor at the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. Welcome to all of you. Dr. Miller, would you please tell us about your study?
Well, first of all, Brian, I want to thank you for the opportunity to engage in this very important question, and also to share this conference with two people I respect very much in terms of understanding and operating municipalities in Pennsylvania. By way of background, think of a municipality in many ways the same way as a household. When it undergoes a significant drop in revenues, adjustments have to be made. And municipalities are finding themselves in a position that the likelihood is there's going to be a significant loss of revenues. Unfortunately, for many of these municipalities, the source of the revenue is, for instance, in the case of income taxes, is lost revenue. They're not going to get that back. In the case of property taxes, it might be delayed. But for a majority of the municipalities, these are lost revenues, and they're simply not going to be replaced. Now, you may be familiar, but Pennsylvania has had a long history of financial struggles on the part of many of its municipalities. Resulted in 1987 in the creation of Act 47, a particularly important piece of legislation to help the state deal with communities that are financially stressed. And in many cases, there are a number of communities that have never really recovered from the loss of manufacturing dating back to the 70s and the 80s. So we come into this situation with communities in very different stages of financial health. Now, let me back up just a minute in terms of saying, look, one of the huge roles that municipalities play is a sorting role. People sort themselves into municipalities based on their preferences or lack of ability to go where they would like to go. So if you think about municipal boundaries, think about them as playing this important role in placing people in different communities, sorting them into different communities. And what we wind up doing is that sorting process winds up aggregating people of wealth in some communities who have access to those communities, making it very difficult for other people, particularly based on class and race, to be able to access those communities, so they have to go someplace else. So we've created this mosaic, if you will, of communities that represent all the different classes and interests, and then that's compounded by the fact that we have so many boundaries. So when we looked at this issue, what we wanted to do was to figure out in terms of saying, well, what is going to happen to municipal revenues in Pennsylvania. And what we weren't sure of was how deep is the financial loss going to be. So as you can see in the table that's in front of you right now, in the yellow box, there's the word low. In the orange box is the term medium, and in the high box or red box is the term high. These represent low revenue loss in terms of a relatively quick turnaround and financial recovery. A medium scenario where maybe we get a reoccurrence of COVID-19 in the fall, and that slows the process. And then a very high estimate in terms of the extent of the loss continues into most of 2021. So we have three different views of, in effect, what the financial loss is going to be. Now, thanks to DCED's financial reporting system, we're able to get a hold of the financial reports that every municipality makes to the state. And in that report, one of the things they include is their what's called undesignated fund balance, or if you want to think of it in layman's terms, how much money do you have in your savings account? So that one of the first ways to address the shortfall would be to try to use your savings. And then based on the three different scenarios for revenue loss, we tried to estimate how much that would be. And as you can see in this table, for just 2020, we're talking about somewhere in the order of 123 to close to $500 million of revenue loss. Now that's not delayed revenue, that's revenue loss, which means that the municipality is either going to have to use reserves, increase fees and revenues, or reduce services, because all municipalities in Pennsylvania are required to have a balanced budget. So this revenue loss has to be made up in one form or another. And if 2021 is it all like 2020 in terms of revenue loss at the high end, we could be looking at $1 billion of potential loss. Now, we look to the municipalities primarily because it's unlikely that the state, facing its own revenue issues, is in a position to provide support for these municipalities. And current legislation at the federal level in terms of stimulus has exempted usually municipalities under 500,000 population. So it's not clear that there's a federal response. So the challenge, one of the challenges is to say is how is that revenue loss of up to $1 billion made up? And hopefully we'll answer that question in a minute. Revenue loss is one of the issues. The second issue, and Becky, if you'll switch to the next slide, is how many potential communities might be affected. And again, given our three different scenarios, I'll briefly talk about the methodology. So we know every community's undesignated fund balance. And we also know, given the portfolio mix of revenues and taxes that each municipality has, how much money they're going to lose in revenues. And it's pretty easy to say, okay, we know their undesignated fund balance. We know how much money they're going to lose. Who winds up, in effect, running out of money? Basically, you exhaust your undesignated fund balance, and you're in a position where you would meet the criteria of financially stressed or financially distressed by the state. So if you look at this table, and particularly focus on the data in the red box, what this does is address the number of municipalities who will exhaust their resources, their cash resources between now and 2021 under our three different scenarios. And so what it says is if we make a quick response, maybe only 12 or so municipalities would reach that condition, which I suppose in a way is a nice way of saying, well, there is some reserve capacity in the system. But look at what happens as the crisis deepens. So that under the medium scenario, we're looking at 47 communities in our region that would qualify. And if we reach the high level of revenue loss, we're talking 112 communities. Now, that does not mean that 112 communities are all going to file for Act 47. What it means is the conditions are right for that to occur. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we've had Act 47 since 1987, and over the 33 years that we've had Act 47, we've had over a couple dozen communities apply. We could be looking at that many communities having to apply for Act 47 in 1 year than we've had in the first 33 years of the Act. So the potential crisis is huge. Let me finish by simply saying, let me be cautious in terms of municipalities have a lot of options in terms of how they respond. So there's no guarantee. I can't tell you which particular municipality is going to file for Act 47 or is going to exhaust their resources, because as the situation deepens, each of these municipalities will be trying to address the problem that they see. So what is going to occur is, I think, a huge number of municipalities trying to think about how to do things differently. And I think it's in that environment where everybody is compelled to think differently that we might be able to actually get some long needed reform, refinement, improvement in how municipalities in Pennsylvania operate. And with that, I'll conclude and turn it back over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Very interesting findings. I'd like to turn to the local area now. And Mayor Garrett, if we could get a reaction from you on the findings of this study and the impact that you see on the borough of Wilkinsburg.
Yeah, so thank you again for organizing this and having us. And I don't think it's too much of a surprise, especially, before we entered COVID, that there were already talks of, our nation going through a recession. So for smaller boroughs, communities that already were receiving limited amount of funding or really, just clearing their fund each year, that any sort of pandemic or crisis is going to set people back. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, an increase in applications for Act 47 or the need to go in there. Wilkinsburg, we were once an Act 47 community, and Dave was actually our coordinator or helped to create that plan. But now moving forward, looking at 2020, we're actually in a decent position right now. And so let me see. Try to adjust my sound. Can you hear me? Does it sound a little bit better? Brian, does it sound a little bit better?
Now it sounds perfect.
Perfect. So Wilkinsburg right now, we're in decent shape. And again, that's because of our department has being very, fiscally mindful and prudent in these ways. But even with that, even being fiscally prudent, we're looking at potentially about a $300,000 to $400,000 loss. That's just projected right now. And so talking with our finance director, who I believe is actually on this call, shout outs to Carol Salisbury, is that that's something we should account for in future budgets, is a line item for, God forbid we're not in another disaster or pandemic, but, just prepping that and being mindful even more of our spending. what I also see for our borough is that future projects, especially when we're talking about communities such as Wilkinsburg, and when we're talking about revitalization, redevelopment, the concerns for, are we going to be able to move forward and still receive, the amount of funding that we have towards things such as infrastructure, such as addressing our blight, vacant properties, small business support. What does that all look like? And so we're still navigating that, but thankfully right now we're in a good place where we haven't had to lay off people because of COVID-19, that we were able to furlough, bring people back. And so I'm really grateful for that, so that we can look at kind of the larger picture of where do we go now, what can we do, or even just, how do we navigate, repivot in these times.
Thank you, Mayor Garrett. Tough times, I'm sure. Kim Bracey, you are, in addition to an official who professionally deals with local government issues across the Commonwealth, you are also a former mayor of the city of York. Could you give us your perspective on this issue? We understand that this particular study looked solely at southwestern Pennsylvania, but certainly the issue is Commonwealth-wide. I'd like to get your perspective from the Commonwealth perspective, but also from your perspective as a former mayor of the city of York.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate being part of this discussion, and thank you all for your leadership. The willingness to have this conversation is commendable, one. Two, this is tough times that we're seeing, as we all know, across the county, the Commonwealth and the country, obviously. So to have these discussions now and really start thinking about what this is going to look like on the other side of it are very important discussions to have. We've been looking at this since the beginning, we being the Department of Community Economic Development and the Center for Local Government Services. I, for one, would not want to be a mayor right now either. So my hat is off to Mayor Garrett and all the other great leaders across the Commonwealth who are taking this issue and really addressing it head on. But there's tough times. I mean, we're dealing with the pandemic, we're dealing with managing our municipalities, we're dealing with protests, and it really makes the narrative one that calls for strong leadership. We, again, at the center have been monitoring it all. Obviously, our job right now is to look at the financial impact and try to gauge what that's going to look like a year from now, 6 months from now, 6 weeks from now, if you will. We've been very helpful, I believe, and impressed and closely aligned with our municipalities that are designated as distress or in Ag 47, and closely working with them because they're already distressed and pulled to the limit in many cases. But we also look at the entire Commonwealth and all the municipalities. And we've been impressed to see the work that everyone's been doing, from our smallest municipalities to the larger ones. I mean, from everything hosting meetings like this and being able to continue the job that they're mandated to do. We've encouraged, as you all probably know by now, everyone to follow the governor's emergency declaration and follow their own as well, so that reimbursements could come in for them to capture costs that they incur during this time. We're talking about safety measures with them and how best to really manage their municipality. So we're concerned about the financial health of municipalities, but also just the everyday interactions and things you have to do and be on to manage a municipality. We, I think through our work looking at the financial stability though, Our work didn't just begin with COVID, thankfully. There's been systems in place, or are systems in place, to really help us monitor this ongoing. We have an early warning system is what we call it. It's managed by one of my colleagues that I think is on the phone right now, Andrew Sheath, and really have indicators to kind of help us know this municipality might be the next one we need to talk to or deal with. And our policy specialists use that listing as well to help them as they're going out and about throughout the Commonwealth and knocking on the doors and offering the assistance of the center. We are making outreach key, even through these times, through attending meetings, the municipalities that they may be having via Zoom or what have you, engaging with the leadership of the municipalities through phone calls, just checking in. And that might seem trite, but I think at the end of the day, as a former mayor, I welcome people checking in on us and making sure that, if there's something that is needed, they have a resource to be able to touch base with. And then I guess, again, as we think about it from a more holistic approach in terms of what do we do going forward, our connections with many of the organizations across the Commonwealth, the Brain Trust, the Pels and others who monitor and look at this stuff daily have been our connectors as well. We have a call with our Act 47 coordinators, those folks that are in this all the time, really looking at their municipalities. So we are staying in communication with everyone as best we can. From the Deputy Secretary to Secretary on down, we make it our business to stay engaged with the leaderships of our municipalities and offer assistance. I know, we're all struggling financially and the state budget isn't any better, but we are anticipating seeing perhaps more municipalities needing our assistance financially. So of course we've asked for more funding to help us address the Act 47 needs that may be coming about, but we know the limitations within that budget as well too. So we'll need others to advocate for more funding to assist us as we go through this process. It's still very early, I believe, and as much as we're monitoring, again, and staying close to the municipalities throughout the Commonwealth, those that were healthy before COVID and those that were distressed, it's early yet to really to make an assessment, a clear assessment about each and every one of them. When I looked at Dr. Miller's report, I mean, it's spot on with what we're finding as well, and things that we were, so as Mayor Guerra said, it wasn't a surprise, but to see it in black and white and know, okay, this is the work that we're doing, this is the work that we're leading, and here's evidence here that, we're really gonna have to buckle down and be closer to these municipalities. And that's been our charge, and that's what we'll continue to do as we go through this. And I know there will be other questions and comments, so I won't take up a lot more time, but I'm thinking about some of the other efforts we're leading, everything from encouraging shared services or regionalizing, and we're advancing those conversations about boundaries. Because at the end of the day, we're going to have to do this world a little different, and our Commonwealth different, and our counties different. And if there are ways to share these services and work together at a different cost, that's obviously the way that we're pushing for. So reform at all levels, I think, will be part of these conversations going forward. And again, I thank you all for leading this one today. And those were some of my first reactions.
Thank you very much, Mayor Bracey. You actually anticipated one of the questions that had come in. And I'd just like to mention to the audience, there is a Q&A function. If you have questions for our panelists, please write them down and we'll get to as many as we can. But in terms of anticipating one of the questions, and I'm going to kick it first over to Dave Miller, and then Mayor Bracey, ask you to respond as well. Dr. Miller, you mentioned that it's possible that on the horizon, there may be a number of additional Act 47 municipalities. Act 47 requires, for assistance, some amount of funding, certainly requires funding to develop a plan and implement the plan. And it also requires certain funds coming in from the state. With the state facing its own financial problem, what's your reaction to the state being prepared to address that simply from a financial situation?
A couple of things. First, Brian, I'm not sure that Act 47, as it's presently written, is really the best tool to have to deal with a large number of municipalities that find themselves in distress. So I think Act 47 has served its purpose in some particular circumstances. So we don't really have, I think, the right tools. I'm really encouraged by what Kim was talking about in terms of some of the more systemic changes that have to occur in our laws regarding municipalities. So, the idea of shared services at a level that we've never seen in the past, of rethinking what's the relationship between county governments and the municipalities within those counties. Are there more things that could be done on a shared basis between counties and municipalities? Those people in Allegheny County might be more familiar with what we call councils of governments, where groups of municipalities get together to address common issues. Well, these councils of governments have been around for 40 or 50 years, and I think they've only scratched the surface of what role they could play in terms of a new municipal environment. There's been conversation over the last 2 years in Allegheny County about the ability of a community to disincorporate, to simply say it doesn't make any sense for us to continue to operate. And being disincorporated would be a lot like what many other states have in terms of the way metropolitan areas are governed. So we have a whole new way we can begin to think about how municipalities operate. And I think it has to start with the state taking that large, broad picture of how we're going to do that, and recognize that Act 47 is not going to be a solution. It's not going to have the financial resources. It's not going to be able to comprehensively deal with 20 or 25 municipalities at the same time. So we've got to change the way we think about municipalities, and hopefully municipalities are in a position where they're going to lead that discussion. So rather than, I think maybe in the past, when we tried to reform local government in Pennsylvania, the solutions have been imposed on municipalities. Hopefully municipalities will see the financial exigency, if you will, of driving a new way of doing business. And I know particularly in the case of Marita in Wilkinsburg, that's what really they've been trying to do. So this thinking outside the box, thinking in new ways, and not thinking that we have the tools right now, but we've got to get those tools, I think is the way we have to go. We have to move forward.
Mayor Bracey, I don't want to put you on the spot in terms of whether Act 47 is appropriate to this particular crisis, but I would like you to react to Dr. Miller's thoughts on whether there are other tools out there that perhaps would be helpful for municipalities as they move through this crisis. And Mayor Garrett, I'm going to pitch that same question to you after Mayor Bracey responds.
I was looking for the reaction to be able to applaud Dr. Miller. Some of the webinars or what have you allow you to do that. Everything he says is so right on, and yes, indeed, there's more tools. And yeah, I love my job now, and I work for DCD, and we are the managers of the program, Act 47. While a mayor, though, I was probably on the other side of that program and advocating for real reform, real changes, real need, particularly as the practitioner on the ground, knowing what your city needs before you get to Act 47 is key. And many of the mayors across this Commonwealth know that. That's why they're elected in those positions. I mean, we have to talk about sharing services. We have to talk about more assistance from our counties taking lead with basic things such as snow removal throughout the entire county, cutting the park's grass. I mean, there are ways that expenses can be shared that make a dent on municipalities' budgets that on the ground local municipalities know. And Dr. Miller is spot on again. I mean, the conversation has to be with the municipalities and the local leaders to help shape that and make it so that it fits. So yeah, there's a whole lot of other tools out there, but I managed the Act 47 program, which won't be enough for this time. And we all know that. I mean, as we indicated, we know it's early yet. We're waiting for numbers to come in to show revenue, EIT and so forth. But at the end of the day, we all know Act 47 is not going to be the answer for municipalities throughout the state. And we have to figure out other ways to lead our municipalities and some of those examples I just gave.
Thank you, Mayor Bracy.
You're welcome.
Mayor Garrett, what kind of assistance does the borough of Wilkinsburg need from the Commonwealth? And how can other organizations, such as the local government academy or the councils of governments or Allegheny County itself, what role do you see them playing in helping your municipality and other municipalities that you see?
So what I would say, and yeah, similar to Mayor Bracy and Dave, who touched on all the things, collaboration, those shared services, that's what we're going to really have to look at and really hunker down on. So thankfully, Wilkinsburg, we have great working relationships with the local government academy, obviously the Allegheny Conference. Also, I want to definitely shout out to Connect. For those on the call who may not be familiar, Connect stands for Congress of Neighboring Communities, something that Dr. Dave Miller founded based out of the Center for Metropolitan Studies, housed at GISPI. I didn't realize how many acronyms I just was about to drop, but GISPI, Graduate School of Public International Affairs at Pitt, and that has, I think, really is really a model that can be used, bringing so many municipalities together. So you have places like Etna, Shaler, Wilkinsburg, and Forest Hills, all the way up to Ross Township at the table, sharing these things. So that it's great to already have the relationships built. And now that we are going to have to work even more with our neighbors and neighboring municipalities, also, we're going to have those real conversations about what does some of these boroughs, townships, what does consolidation look like? You know, I've always thought, I know this is not a favorable topic, but 130 municipalities in one county is quite a bit. It's quite a lot, and especially, you know, when you look at statewide with Pennsylvania being a commonwealth, and there's so many different forms of municipality in our commonwealth that it's truly not sustainable. So really looking at some of those towns who already have everything regionalized and already have a lot of the shared services with other agencies and organizations, that, you know, really looking at what does that look like, but in such a way where it doesn't feel like, because obviously, you know, people are proud of their communities. That's why we have so many, but how can we still incorporate the culture and identity of one community as it may have to join another one? So I believe that's what we're really going to have to look at in the next steps. And any particular requests from, to answer your first part, any particular requests for DCD, honestly, that's another agency we've been extremely fortunate and blessed to have a great relationship with Mayor Bracy and Secretary Vallejo, and I mean the whole team, Secretary Gavin, everyone really, and just, you know, continue those conversations, those honest conversations on how are these projects going to change, especially Wilkinsburg. We've been fortunate to be the recipients, or have organizations in our borough be recipients of the RCAP. And actually, I don't think I realized what that acronym is. It's like, I know you just spit it out so much, but, you know, community infrastructure funding, the funding from the gaming fund, GEDF, all of those things, but really talking about, okay, here's what we want to accomplish. Here's what's on our list. How can we still get there through X, Y, and Z? Maybe we can't go directly from A to B as we thought, you know, submit an app, boom, it's done, but what can we do? So really, it's going to be conversations and collaborations that are going to carry us to the next steps.
Thank you, Mayor Garrett. I have a question that's come in from the audience. It is for any or all of the panelists that would care to react to the question. How do you feel that most municipalities are going to balance their budgets in the coming year and into next year? Are they going to look to cuts in services? Are they, do you expect them to raise taxes? What kind of responses would you anticipate municipalities employing?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Miller, go ahead, sir.
No, go ahead, Kim, that's fine.
I think all that you mentioned, Brian, and then obviously more, we'll see increased taxes. Our municipalities, Act 47 municipalities, many of them laid off quite a few personnel right now and have not brought them back. They're learning to manage with that decreased staff, and we'll see probably more of that continue. So to me, the two that you just mentioned right off the top are what we're expecting. And unfortunately, in our more distressed municipalities, you know, raising taxes is that much more distressing on the residents as well too. But raising taxes and personnel cuts will be what we see most of.
I would also probably second that, but we're with Wilkinsburg, as some of you may be familiar, our taxes are already extremely high based on the school tax millage. So we can't. I mean, that's also why we've suffered population decline, is because our taxes are so high, and it creates a barrier for people to want to be here. So I already know within myself that, you know, we have to look at any potential option where we can skirt increasing taxes. It may have to be we increase our municipal service fees, or, you know, something like that, but increasing property taxes, we can't add that to a burden already on our residents, being in an economically, you know, still a little bit distressed community.
So the implicitly what we've been talking about today is that no two municipalities are alike. And so in effect, we have one set of municipalities that probably have the financial resources that they're able to respond. And so put those aside. As I mentioned earlier, there's been a long history of fiscal distressed municipalities in Pennsylvania, and particularly Western Pennsylvania. So we have a disparate group of communities. We have some communities that are struggling. Their tax rates are very high, as Marita just said, in Wilkinsburg. They've gone through 30 years of cutting services. There there isn't anything really left to cut. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the sorting process, what it means is those are the communities that are more apt to be low-income communities. They're more apt to have a higher percentage of African Americans in their communities because they don't have the same sorting choices that other people have. So we have the second group of municipalities which are going to be disproportionately affected by the downturn because they don't have anywhere to turn. And I think it's in those cases, with 535 municipalities in the 10 counties in Western Pennsylvania that we studied, potentially 112 of those would meet the criteria for Act 47. Even though they're spread all over our 10 counties, the likelihood is those are the communities that have been financially struggling for years and years and years and simply don't have the options that a more, let's say, affluent community should have. So we're really stuck with, and it's going to be a big problem for the state, because if you have a group of fiscally unhealthy communities and you put them together to do stuff together, you simply have a bigger group of unhealthy communities. If you go about trying to combine the resources, the more affluent and less affluent, then that runs into all sorts of historical problems and now legal problems, such that that's probably not going to be a particularly attractive alternative. So within that context, what are these municipalities going to do that have already been trying to live within a limited budget for a long period of time? And how is the state going to try to respond to that group of communities, recognizing that there's another group of communities that might not want to particularly play in that field, might not feel the same pressures that they're feeling. So, I mean, my sense is that communities are going to do what they've been doing. You know, you lay off another police officer, you don't plow as often, you change the mix of the salt. You do all these little things until you get to the point you can't do it anymore. And I think what I was really hearing Kim say was DCD understands that the little things aren't gonna work. We've got to be thinking about bigger systemic changes to the system. And if necessity is the mother of invention, not to get too trite, that's where we are right now. Is will we see the opportunity to, in effect, move beyond the conversations that we've had for the last 30 years into a new level of conversation where we really do change the way we do business, and do that in a way that municipalities don't necessarily see that as threatening as they have in the past.
You're right on again, Dr. Miller. And like many are saying and realizing regarding, the protests. I mean, now is the time to act on some real changes that can impact our municipalities. If we want to really see that happen, let's start merging police departments. Let's talk fire departments. I mean, everyone knows those are the biggest costs in municipalities. And to your point, we don't need two distressed municipalities doing it together. We need a healthier municipality joining in and understanding that this helps everyone at the end of the day. And so as much as we can help with some of those conversations, again, mergers and regionalizations, we will. And are doing so at this time.
Mayor Garrett, Wilkinsburg Borough has undertaken a number of intergovernmental cooperation opportunities with the city of Pittsburgh and others. Could you talk a little bit about those and let the audience know how those service sharing arrangements are helping the borough?
Yeah, so the major thing that we did, council did, I believe it was either 2009 or 2010. It was before I became on council, but merging our fire department with the city of Pittsburgh's fire department. So I know, and that immediately saved us about $900,000 in that contract. And what's really great is that the firehouse station, the engine, is still located in our borough building. So that, obviously is going to be a main concern in anything when you share services or you merge or whatever. Does that mean my community gets last? Do they hit priority? Where are we placed kind of on that totem pole? And so it's really been a great benefit because we still have our fire station located in the borough building, but it's contracted through City of Pittsburgh, and some of the original Wilkinsburg firefighters were also able to stay on there as well. So that kind of also helped proceed into us partnering, or not partnering, but contracting City of Pittsburgh Waste Management, who does our trash pickup. So that allows for us to do in-house recycling. So Wilkinsburg Borough, we do our own recycling. And then furthermore, as of 2015, 2016, we did the partnership for our schools with Pittsburgh Public Schools. And that is where Wilkinsburg, we still have our primary and our intermediate school. And from 7th to 12th grade, our students then become a part of the Pittsburgh public school system. And the neighboring school that they would go to is Westinghouse, but the great thing is that they're also, if eligible, they can go to the magnet program. So they can go to Kappa, SciTech, those Obama, those types of programs as well. And to add to that, they're also eligible for the Pittsburgh Promise. So we've seen that in these collaborations and these partnerships, that not only have we been able to save capital, but we've been able to increase capacity. So that allows us to really maximize where we can in other pockets of our budget. So we were able to, a couple years ago, or 3 years ago, 2017, start a huge paving project in our borough because so many of our streets had been neglected, not taken care of due to financial limitations. So now, having some of the operating costs and things that usually we would incur, having that reduced, that we were able to, pave almost about 60-70% of the streets. And actually, as we are talking right now, I'm witnessing the two-way street conversion on Wood Street. So I don't know if that affected my sound earlier, but those projects are still going on right now. The concern again is after this, what's next? What may have to get scrapped? Where may we have to reroute where we're going? So, but thankfully, I feel confident with having a great staff, great leaders, and our department heads and our borough employees, that we all want to see the best for our community and willing to put the work in, whatever it may take.
I think that's a great story, Mayor Garrett. Wilkinsburg is certainly on the forefront of intergovernmental cooperation. A question came in though. The actions that Wilkinsburg took and has taken over the years have been voluntary. You saw a need, you saw a solution by working with a neighboring municipality, and that's the direction you took it. But now I'd like to turn to Mayor Bracy and back to Dr. Miller. Are there particular additional policies that perhaps are unlikely to happen voluntarily, where the state should have the power to step in and make change where change wouldn't happen organically? I'd like you to reflect a little bit on that question, if you would, please.
I saw that question too, Brian, and I thought, okay, good, Mayor Garrett got it. The Commonwealth is the Commonwealth. Everyone has their say. Every municipality is their own municipality, and they lead their municipalities that way. So the state can encourage, possibly even help fund, perhaps regionalization conversations or shared services and help from that angle. But until there's legislation changing how we allow municipalities to operate, all 2,560 of them will continue to operate as independent in areas that they are allowed to by law. But I think, you know, this can be shaped differently through policy changes and again, legislation and great leadership. And Mayor Garrett knows I'm not saying it just to patronize her. She is on the cusp of doing some really great things out there. And we have recognized her as such. I mean, you have to have relationships and conversations with neighboring municipalities to really shape this and move things in a different direction. And it's past time in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, for one thing. So kudos to her, congratulations. And I think keep up that kind of spirit and work. And maybe it could continue to grow throughout Allegheny County, but it is indeed, back to, I think, Dr. Miller's earlier reference, something that has to start on the ground among the municipalities and the municipality leaders.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I really appreciate that. I really do. And you know, I look up to you. So thank you. That really means a lot coming from you.
So let me just add, it is the $160,000 question. For instance, in Act 47, written back in 1987, there was provisions for the state to be able to impose intergovernmental solutions to help Act 47 communities, which has never been implemented because, as Kim said, there is no political will at this point to engage municipalities that don't want to voluntarily participate. So how does the state develop some new policies? How do we systematically change the rules in a way that perhaps some of the communities aren't going to really like and might impose on them conditions that they don't have right now? But I think, and I was so pleased, Marita, with the way you were talking about, gosh, you're doing things in Wilkinsburg and you're still Wilkinsburg. I mean, you've made some very, very significant changes in the way schools delivered, fire is delivered, code enforcement is delivered, and yet you're still a very active community engaged in making a lot of the decisions about the world. So I think Wilkinsburg stands as an example of, say, you can make these types of changes and still have your community. Whether the state's going to be in a position that it is going to be able to push that municipal interest far enough that we get that type of change so that it's not strictly on a voluntary basis, that's the unknown question. And I wish I had an answer, Brian.
Thanks, Dave. You had mentioned earlier, Dave, that there has been an attempt to get legislation passed to allow municipalities only in Allegheny County to proceed to a disincorporation process whereby Allegheny County government would begin to assume service delivery in those municipalities that voluntarily wish to disincorporate. As I understand it, the problem now is that a municipality that wishes to make that decision to voluntarily go out of business, so to speak, isn't permitted to by state legislation. How do you see that that particular issue going forward? Is that a potential solution?
Well, I think it's a great solution. And let me just say, as I mentioned earlier, in many states, probably 35 states in the United States, there is what is called unincorporated territory within a county or within a metropolitan area. So that the idea that not every inch of land is in an incorporated municipality is not unique. What's unique is in Allegheny County, we decided to put every inch of land into a municipality. Now, if that municipality wanted to go out of business, said, we don't have the resources anymore, there's no legal means for it to do that. The only way it can do that is to find another community, Community B, that would be interested in merging with Community A. So Community B is not likely to take on at this point a fiscally challenged Community A. So it just doesn't happen. What disincorporation does is simply allows a community that recognizes that it just doesn't have the resources to be able to provide basic services to its community to be able to disincorporate, and then typical of many other states, simply be unincorporated territory where services are primarily provided by the county. It really is an important policy solution for not only Allegheny County, but for Pennsylvania. And I'd like to see that conversation reemerge, if you will, as part of the ongoing conversation that we're having with a number of other really high level changes that we've been talking about today. And as you've seen, there are a lot of creative ideas out there in the sense that it's not that we don't know what we could be doing. It's we don't know how to build a consensus to get us to those solutions. And with encouraging words from Kim today and examples from Marita and our own data, which shows we're going to have a lot of communities in dire financial straits. Maybe the conditions are right for us to do things that we haven't been able to muster the will to do up to this point.
Thank you, Dave. Well, as we draw close to the closing hour, I'd just like to say that this has been a very interesting and it's a very important discussion. As we conclude, I'd like to thank our panelists, Kim Bracey, Marita Garrett, and David Miller for sharing their thoughts today. I'd also like to thank again our sponsors, Peoples, Giant Eagle, Highmark, and UPMC Health Plan for their support that allows us to offer this critical programming. Invite the audience to be on the lookout for announcements about upcoming installments of the Allegheny Conference Response and Recovery webinar series. Thank you very much for your participation and your attention to this issue today, and goodbye.